Hi, my name is Kathy Skipper and I'm a menopause midwife. Welcome to my channel, The Alchemy of Menopause. This is the second video in a series of videos that I'm doing one a week. And each week I'm going to look at one of the chakras in order, going from the root upwards, and how we can look at the chakra, any blockages in the chakra, and ways of getting the energy moving in the chakra in relation to menopause. So this is the second week, as I said, and the chakra we're going to be looking at this week is called, in Sanskrit, Svadhisthana. And so last week, we really honed in on that foundational solidity of the root chakra, which, be it menopause or not menopause, being grounded, embodied, rooted in this foundation that's connected to the earth is important for any healing and any healthy journey. But even more so in menopause, because menopause, everything gets moved around. We're changing. We're in a liminal phase. We're in an inner phase already of transformation. So that rootedness is very important. And then the second chakra, here we are. It's also called the sacral chakra. And that's because, a lot of people say it's 2 fingers down from the navel. And that's true, but I would say it really takes up that whole womb space. It's like, if you think of the rootedness of last week's work on the root chakra, think of those 2 rooted legs. We talked about the legs being related to the root chakra. So the legs are rooted like the roots of a tree. Underneath your feet, as we said, you can feel the roots anchoring you to the earth. You are part of the earth. You breathe with the earth. And then, now that that is solid, there is this cup-like space, this cauldron, this holy grail, if you like, which is the feminine womb space. In men, it's the pelvic area. But as we're talking about women and menopause, let's just keep this idea of the cup or the cauldron. And the womb space, in the work that I do with women in the Alchemy of Menopause program, we really, once we're rooted and connected to the earth, we then really situate ourselves in the womb space. And Svadhisthana means the seat of the self. In French, we call it the assise, or the abode of the self. And in meditation, for example, when you're sitting on your cushion for meditation, you need to have that feeling of being sitting in yourself. And as I said, in French, they call it assise. And the womb space enables us to do that. If you drop down into your womb space, you bring your attention down into your womb space. And, as I always say in my meditations, your sexual organs will sort of make some kind of acknowledgement. You'll feel them acknowledging that they are aware when you bring your attention down into that space. And, feel yourself making it cozy. That's your inner abode, the seat of the self. I often say to women, put rugs down on the floor, feel the flame in the middle just right, herbal tea brewing. You sit in that womb space. That's your control center. That's your assise. So in many of the books written about Svadhisthana, it's emphasized that this chakra is to do with our sensuality, our sexuality, our relationship with others, our desires, therefore our creativity, our emotions, and the desire to grow, which means that transformation and change happen within this chakra. And I would say that's all true, but in terms of menopause, we're at a different stage in our life. So we are growing, but we're also healing and integrating and sort of going through things so that we can leave behind what isn't ours, reclaim what is, ready to move on into those sovereign years. So this all happens as well with this asces in the womb space. And I think one of the main things that is concentrated here or begins its work here is this idea of a balance between the masculine and feminine polarities within us. So instead of it being concentrated at menopause on us having relationships in the outer world, in fact, many women actually express that they need a lot more alone time. They get more frustrated with their families, with their husbands, with their work colleagues. And that's because there is this natural pull for self reflection and inner time and alone time. And in terms of instead of sort of going out and looking for new relationships or developing new relationships, the idea is at menopause, we're healing what is out of balance between our inner and outer, sorry, between our inner feminine and inner masculine. And these are symbolized in this womb space by the ovaries. And the space in the womb is where, the masculine and feminine come together to create a third. Biologically, that would be the sperm and the egg. Um, Within ourselves, it's the energy of the yin and the yang, consciousness, unconsciousness, feminine, masculine. So we're invited during menopause to reflect on how these might be out of balance. And the way we find out how our masculine and feminine energies within us are out of balance is by looking at how they play out in real life. How do your relationships as a woman play out with men in the real life? And you don't have to be heterosexual to do this. You still have relationships with the opposite sex, be they mentors, colleagues, brothers, fathers, friends. So how have your relationships with the masculine played out in your partnerships or your other relationships? And then you can go even further back and look at how the relationships that your mother had with men played out. And that might give you some indications of how they are in or out of balance within you now, and your grandmother, etc. So that's a big part of the work. And I have done some videos on this in my channel. The other aspect of Svadhisthana, which in general talk about this chakra, as I said, is sexuality and sensuality. And again, in menopause, this comes up, but in a very different way. So instead of wanting to be sexual, many women at menopause express that their libido is much lower, or they don't feel at all sexual, or they have vaginal dryness they're suffering from. And I think, again, this reason for this is because there's a self-reflection going on. There's a realignment, a reset as we go towards more and more wholeness, which is the journey of menopause towards becoming a sovereign woman. Yes, we're aging, but also growing in another sense. We're asked to really be honest about our sensuality and our sexuality. And I think it's at this stage in a woman's life, and I've also mentioned this in other videos, that a woman is ready to say, I'm not going to do what doesn't feel right for me. I'm not going to have sex just to please another person. I'm not going to ever do anything that doesn't feel right for me. And I'm going to heal the sexual trauma that I've had in my life, or that is in my mother line and has been in some way, unintegrated so far and needs to be healed. So there's a big piece of the menopause puzzle, which is about really healing our own traumas around sexuality and sensuality, and deciding what we need, what we want, how we feel about our bodies, how we feel about our sensuality, turning up in relationships that are sexual very honestly, not being the goddess we feel we should be, not turning up as a sexy woman in terms of how society tells us it is, but turning up honestly, turning up and saying, this is my body. My body has been traumatized. My mother line has been traumatized, and I'm just going to turn up honestly. And when I did that, my body, as I've said in another video, moved in very odd ways and expressed these noises. It was really safe. I was with a partner, my husband, who I'm very safe with, and my body turned up to express these things that needed finally to be expressed, that it had been holding on to. So there are, cellular memories at menopause that can be released. We have to be safe, and better be on our own working through these in the way that we can than in an unsafe relationship. I think that's very important as well at menopause. The Svadhisthana chakra resonates with what's called the sacral plexus. And this is a network of nerves that are located in the pelvis. And they provide motor and sensory movement to everything that's in the lower part of the body. So there's this idea of movement. So I've noticed with some of the women that I'm working with who have a blocked sacral chakra, it's not just about feeling blocked or numb or lacking of libido sexually, but often there's a sciatica. And this comes from this blocked movement on a physical level, which is showing us that something needs to be healed on this level. So what else? Yes, the other aspect of this chakra is that it's related, is the color is orange, which is supposed to be a sort of reflection of the red color of the root chakra and the yellow of the manipura, which is the solar plexus chakra, that reflects onto the water, which is the symbol or the element of the Svadhisthana chakra. And water is very feminine. In the menopause of alchemy work that I do with women, it relates to the second alchemical stage, which is Solucio. There's very big correlation here between Solucio and Svadhisthana chakra. And water is, it's about fluidity. Meditation, when you're meditating and people say, I get a download, it's like, it feels like water, a download. True download in meditation feels like water, but it's dry. It has the energy of water, but obviously it's not wet. But this feminine energy of fluidity, of movement, relates to the other watery substances in the body. So the way that our blood circulates in the body, our urine, and that's also, this chakra is also related to the bladder. And so, and I did say last week that the root chakra can be related to the bladder. And I would say that the three lower chakras all sort of share aspects with each other. So there's this idea of the flow of energy, like the flow of water. And this, as I said, is connected to not just the feminine, but the moon, which is connected to the feminine, which is connected to water. And we see this in some of the images of this chakra that you can find online. So you'll see that the root chakra from last week had 4 lotus petals. The Svadhisthana chakra has 6. And then sometimes, even in some of the Sanskrit images, there are 2 other lotuses within the main lotus. And then often you see this sometimes depicted as a crocodile. It's actually officially called a makara creature, and it's this watery creature that, and this is very important, it's a watery creature that symbolizes this access to the unconscious. And this is where in menopause we really are at an important point. Because any liminal phase, any place of transformation where we're leaving who we were behind and we haven't yet grown into who we are, so perimenopause, is a place where the unconscious plays an enormous part in the transformational process. So things that have been hidden and buried in the unconscious, parts of the feminine that over generations of our mother line have been abandoned, will come up to be reclaimed. And we need to trust that. Parts of ourself that we've abandoned as children will come up to be reclaimed, or we're invited down to go and find them. It's the underworld journey, which is really symbolized by this Makara creature, this underwater creature. So it's an invitation into these emotions, into this material that up until now hasn't been available to us. But this is one of the things that I believe this hormonal reset, these hormonal changes trigger. They don't just trigger physical changes, but they trigger changes in our whole psyche. So emotional changes, these emotions that were there. When women say, oh, I feel much more emotional, I'm crying a lot, I feel angry more, it must be the hormones. Well, it is the hormones, but it's not that the hormones are creating these emotions. The hormones are revealing what's already there, already in the underworld, already in the unconscious. So it's an invitation to dive into the waters of our own unconscious. Um, so let's look at some of the symptoms that can point to a blocked Svadhisthana chakra. And I would highlight here that, in a way, I don't want to say a blocked Svadhisthana chakra because that points to something being wrong. And I think in menopause, it's not so much that it's blocked as that we are being it's being brought to our attention because this is where the work is. Don't forget, it's the womb space. Menopause is a feminine initiation. So we're being brought to this womb space. Because that's where it's happening at one level. Yes, it happens in all the chakras, and we have to be aware of all the chakras. But this is the assis. This is the abode of the self, abode of the feminine self in this case. So some of the pointers that there is work to do here is this feeling, like I've already expressed, of a lot of emotions coming up. You might not feel so stable in your emotions as you used to be. They're kind of overwhelming. They can be overwhelming or out of your control. They're coming up without being invited. Some women say, I just can't help crying all the time. Well, that's normal. I wouldn't say go and get an antidepressive or go and have HRT so you don't have to feel this. I would say the opposite. This is an invitation to feel, and to feel is to heal. You're finally acknowledging these things that have been buried underground, but controlling you in some way. Now you're going to feel them. They're going to be integrated, and you're going to be free of them. So it's part of the journey. So yes, your emotions will be very, very sort of sensitive. You might have mood swings that are much less stable than you're used to. A heightened sensitivity, just seeing something on the television makes you cry, or just hearing a story makes you cry, or something happens in the house and you're much more angry than usual. So there's this overly emotional feeling. And it might be difficult to actually know what you're feeling. You might not be able to, and that is what frightens women. Not only am I overly emotional, I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know where it's coming from. And that's because it's coming from this watery underworld part of yourself, which is known as the unconscious. And this, you also at menopause, what often comes up because you're leaving behind your sense of self from before is, I'm not worth anything. I don't know who I am anymore. I doubt myself. And these are all, again, normal emotions that need to be felt. They're not valid. You are like the caterpillar who's turned to mush. The caterpillar has no idea what's happening and who he is or she is anymore. But it's a normal, I think, to reassure you, it's a normal part of the process. It won't stay like this forever. And the two emotions that are very much linked with this chakra in general are guilt and shame. So, as we said, fear is very linked to the survival problems that we might face with the root chakra. And here it's shame and guilt. So it's good to work with these. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So things that will come up and affect the energy in this chakra are past traumas. I've spoken about, especially sexual traumas. Stress and imbalance in your life will make this feel even worse. So that's where the importance of working with the root chakra first and really getting that solid foundation is important. Relationship issues. Now, relationship issues that are happening in your life now, how you feel differently in certain relationships, how certain relationships are getting on your nerves or not working for you, but not just that. Relationships from the past, working through what was the pattern in my relationships that I really need to deal with that keeps coming up, or even past ancestral relationships in your motherline that were very traumatic, that have sort of, there's a residue that's played out in your own relationships. So the whole theme of relationships will come up. And you might feel that maybe you were a very spiritual person, you loved your church, you loved your spirituality, and it doesn't talk to you anymore. Something's changing. Or you just don't know who you are spiritually, or you've never had a spiritual life and you feel you need one, but you don't know what to do. And here I would say there's a lot of good things you can do. And I'll talk about that again in a minute when we get on to some of the things that you can do, which is now. So let's just start with the movement aspect. So to get movement, and if your sacral chakra feels sort of stagnant, as if the water isn't moving, it's like stagnant, or you feel numb down there, then my invitation is to, um, put on some music that you love in your own home and just let go and dance when you're alone. Or do some yoga that will concentrate around some movements that concentrate around the hips. Um, these are all good things for activating on a physical level, the sacral chakra. Because it's related to water, hot baths with magnesium salts and some flower essential oils like ylang ylang or neroli, or jasmine, that get that feeling of sensuality and movement and opening, and that floral, that also touches the heart as you bathe in the water. I love hot springs personally, and I'm lucky because I live in New Mexico, so there are lots of them. So I go to hot springs and I soak. Um, Going into the river or going to the sea are all things that will help you to sort of bring movement and energy to this part of you. Inner child work. So we mentioned the inner child. So inner child work is important to do with the emotions that come up with this chakra. So I think there's a video that is a guided journey to connect with your inner child. That would be a really good one to do now. And rose attar is a lovely oil. It's the rose that's been distilled into sandalwood. It's an Indian rose attar that I use for this with a lot of my clients. And that's because the rose is very nourishing. It's like a mother, but a good mother, a mother with unconditional love, nourishing and nurturing. But because it's in the sandalwood, it's also very, the sandalwood holds the rose, so you feel held. It's really lovely for inner child work. And remember the mantra, to feel is to heal. Really feel feelings that are coming up, not just with the inner child work, but any feelings that are coming up. One thing you could do is I use helichrysum for this. On a physical level, helichrysum heals bruises. It gets the energy, it gets the blood going where there's congealed blood. It helps to move things where there's a bruise and heal where you've had a shock to the physical body. I always give the example of someone putting their thumb in the car door and shutting the car door on it. It's so painful. Well, helichrysum will really take away that shock, that physical shock. Well, it does the same when we're working on these feelings that have been buried. It'll help you to release them, to bring the tears that need to come. So you could smell helichrysum and journal on any feeling that you're feeling that's coming up, and help it to come to the forefront so that you can work with it. So I talked about shame. So shame is one of the main things that comes up, shame and guilt with this chakra. And shame is important to work with. And I was working with shame the other day, and I realized that one of the shames I feel is that I feel when people get to know me, they'll be disappointed in me. They might like my classes, they might like what they see of me, and then they get a class and then they'll be disappointed in me, which isn't true. I know it's not true, but I feel that. And so I worked with the shame and I took it back. I asked, well, when did I really feel the shame? And it turns out that I found a letter when I was clearing out my father's house a few weeks ago. And I knew this, but to actually see it written, it was a letter that my mother wrote when she was in the maternity, and she'd just given birth to me by cesarean. And she was writing it to her mother-in-law. And she expressed how she was bitterly disappointed at having had a girl child, and that she really wanted a boy, and that, my father was pleased enough, but she, went on about her disappointment. And I realized, well, that was a shame. As a child, somehow I sensed I was a disappointment to my mother. Plus, I was born by cesarean, so in those days it was a full cesarean. And when my did I talk about this in the last video? I might have done, but when the nurse brought me to my mother, she didn't want to accept me. Obviously hit me because I think I've talked about this in the other video, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But I realized this is the shame. I am a disappointment to my mother because I'm a girl, so I must be a disappointment to others. So realizing where the shame came from, I was able to say, well, just because I was a disappointment to my mother doesn't mean in life I'm a disappointment to people. So our shame story is important to work with. And I found a tool that's really good is automatic writing. So, automatic writing isn't thinking about what we're writing about. You could put a timer on and write for 10 minutes, just whatever comes up, without thinking about it, without filtering it. I've talked about this before in other videos. And you're trying to get through to this unconscious material. You're trying to sort of open something up so the unconscious material can come through your pen. So labdanum, which is I'm warning you, is very, very powerful oil for working with the unconscious. But if you smell it and do this exercise, you will probably have some aha moments where this unknown material comes to the surface. Collage. I did a lot of collage when I was working on my Svadhisthana as I was going through menopause. I would go into the feeling that I could feel, and I often felt a feeling in my belly. Sometimes it was a feeling of fire or pain, and I'd go into the feeling, sort of really allow the feeling to express itself, and then I would do the collage, sort of allowing the feeling to show me which images to tear out and where to put them on the paper. And it was very, very powerful. And I used those collages for some years, sort of kept going back to them and seeing more and more of the unconscious material that had come through them. So collage or painting, poetry, any form of artistic free form that can help you to work with these emotions. And I talked about spirituality. Well, one of the things that I think is important at menopause is reconnecting with the spiritual aspect of the feminine, or the divine feminine aspects, which are really to do with the goddess. So looking back in history, pre-Christianity, who were the goddesses in each of the cultures, or in the culture that your motherline came from, and what did they represent, and which of these goddesses sort of triggers something in you now? And read her stories and draw her and ask her for support. I'm working with Lakshmi at the moment, who's a Hindu goddess and ancient. I started working with her because my motherline originated from Assam in northeast India, and she was one of the goddesses that was very much present there. And she really resonates with what I need in life now. So I bought a little statue of her that I have on my altar, and I call her in. I ask for her help. So really connecting through a goddess that talks to you is a beautiful way of working with the feminine spirituality during menopause. And finally, women's groups, connecting with a group of women, because this idea of relationship, which is connected with the Svadhisthana chakra, I think during menopause is more about connecting with other women who you can relate to, who are going through menopause. That's why my programs are so important for women, rather than connecting on the outside with the usual type of relationships that you've been having, really connecting with the feminine. So that's all I've got. I hope it's helpful. I would love to hear of any of your reflections or experiences, so you could share that in the link below, in the comments below. I'll share a link to Kathy's Attars, where you can buy the oils that I mentioned of very, very high quality. In Kathy's Attars, we only work with 4 distillers, because our motto is we work with distillers we know intimately and we love. So if you like my channel, it would be really helpful if you could subscribe and like. That would help the algorithm. And lots and lots of love. See you next week for the Manipura chakra.